Welcome back to the channel, my friends. On today's video, we are looking at this Remington walk-behind self-propelled mower. It does have electric start with a battery on it, with a start button up here. It's a bagger, mulch, side discharge. I do have an extra piece in here to keep the discharge open. The issue with this mower is it actually died while mowing and it will not start. Everything seems to rotate normally, but it will not fire. So on today's video, we're going to diagnose what the problem is, what the issue is, and hopefully fix that. The very first thing we want to do is remove the air cleaner. So this thing obviously will not start. Either it's a fuel issue, spark issue, or something mechanically broke to where it doesn't have compression. But most likely it's either spark or a fuel issue. Obviously I've made sure we got a full tank of fuel. There's no shut-off valve or anything on this, so we have fuel supplying directly to the carburetor. So one of the very first things we want to do is take starting fluid, or if you have carb cleaner, we can spray that right into the throttle here and pull the cord, which I have already done on this, and it makes no difference. It still does not want to fire. That tells us that it's not a fuel issue. If we're giving it fuel directly and it still doesn't fire, that most likely is not the issue. The next thing we want to look at is spark. You got spark plug here. Pull the spark plug wire off of the spark plug, like so, and we want to test for spark. Now I have a couple different spark testers here. I have this adjustable kind. You can physically see the spark jumping from point A to B, or this one's a little easier to use. It just plugs in between. This end will plug onto the spark plug, and this one onto the spark plug cable. Spark tester attached. We can go ahead and either electric start it, or you can pull the cable, and you should be able to see a light here. Now I've already done that on this, and there seems to be no spark. Nothing lights up as we try to start it. So that tells me there is a spark issue. Most likely it's the ignition coil on this. So we'll go ahead and remove this cover. There's 3 bolts on top of this, 10 millimeter, 1, 2, and 3. So with those 3 nuts removed, should be able to pull that right off the top. And underneath of that is the cover, and we can just set that aside. There is the fuel tank attached to the back of this. We don't need to disassemble that. We'll just set that aside. Now with that off, you can see the ignition coil here. There is a kill wire which stops the mower when you need it to. That'll have to be disconnected. That's fished from underneath the governor here, and it plugs into this switch here. Now you could also have an issue with the switch here, which is linked to the lever up here. It's basically an on and off switch. Once you have that squeeze to run the mower, that closes the switch. Well, that opens it actually, so the kill wire is not grounded and it's able to create spark. Now you could have issue with that. Go ahead and test that also. The easiest way of doing that is removing the kill wire from the switch, just like so. Also try to put everything back together and start it now. And if it does start, all you have to do to shut this off is you want to have a piece of wire here and connect that to ground, anywhere metal, onto the mower. That's the only way you're going to be able to shut it off. So even with the kill wire off of the coil, I was able to put everything back together and try to start the mower, but we still have no spark. So again, in your case, if you did have spark, or if the engine started up with this being disconnected, the way to shut it off is to put a wire and ground it. So you want to have the wire already connected, so if it starts, you can just ground it to shut it back off. Now, in your case, if that started the engine, your most likely issue will be this switch here, or the wire is chafed somewhere and grounding out on the engine, not letting it start. In my case, even with the switch disconnected, it still does not have spark, it still does not start. Most likely our issue is in the coil, so we'll go ahead and remove the ignition coil. There's two 10mm bolts, one here, and there's a stud here, so we'll go ahead and get that removed. When pulling this off, you want to make sure you grab all the hardware. Once these two are off, there are some spacers underneath of the coil. As you can see, there's one here and one here. Ignition coil removed from the mower. I also have a new one here. We can test this coil with the multimeter with the ohm setting. So if you put it on the ohm settings, we should be able to test for resistance on the secondary and the primary against the body here and see what a resistance is. Now, there are specifications for these. I don't have them, but we'll go ahead and test for an open on this coil and see what we get. I have one lead connected to the primary and the other to the kill wire on the secondary, and we have 12.96 kilo ohms. Also test the secondary on the kill wire against the body. New coil, so we got one lead connected to the kill wire and one on the body of the coil here. We have 2 ohms on that one. Also, we can test our primary lead connection there to the body and 12.95 kilo ohms. Write those numbers down. We can compare that to our old coil. We can perform the same tests on our old original coil that came off of the mower. So I have one lead connected to the kill wire and the other, and you want to go ahead and scratch it so you get clean metal contact, and we have nothing. So that tells me that circuit's open. That's most likely our issue. We can also check on the primary circuit, leaving that onto that, and we have a reading. So that circuit's okay. That not have any resistance here when we touch the body tells us that circuit's open. So this coil is definitely bad. We'll go ahead and replace it with the new coil. Now the kill wire may be a little different. You might have to cut your original wire off of the original. That way you have the same end plug, and that's what we'll be doing. And let's get. So I was able to cut the original wire off from our old coil since it had a different plug on that, and install it onto our new coil. Now some of these will come with the right plug. I will put some of that stuff in the description for you. So now that we got the right end on this wire, we'll go ahead and install this onto the mower. We have the coil in place where it should be, and I have both of the bolts not fully tightened, so you are able to move the coil back and forth since these holes are slotted or elongated. And don't forget your spacers that go underneath. And we have the kill wire connected back to the switch, making sure we route the wire properly so it is not getting caught in the governor or any other linkages. Now there is a plastic clip here from the bottom that the wires go through, and behind this spring clip and into the switch here. So now that we have all that properly connected, there's one more step we need to complete to install and fully tighten this ignition coil. Is we need to gap this against the flywheel properly. Now I'm sure there are specs on this. I'm not going to bother looking for any of that. I'm going to use a piece of this manila envelope. It's actually doubled, and we'll set that in between the flywheel and the coil. We'll push that forward, and that should set just about the right amount of gap. We don't want it rubbing up against the flywheel. We just want to have a gap. I think that should be perfect. We'll go ahead and tighten up both of these bolts and button up the rest of this. With both of these bolts tightened up, I should be able to remove that piece of paper from in between. If you spin this by hand, it should not rub up against the coil. Should have an even gap on both sides. Now that we have that completed, we'll go ahead and reverse the steps and get our cover back on the mower and connect our spark plug cable onto the spark plug, and we should be able to test this mower. We have everything buttoned up on this. The top cover is back on with the 3 10mm bolts or nuts up top. The air cleaner is back on. We're ready to go ahead and test this thing. Looks like we are back in business. That was the issue, ignition coil. That's a typical issue, ignition coil going bad on any mower. I've even had to do this on a 0-turn here. Same issue, but of course that's a V-twin or a dual cylinder, so one cylinder was firing and not the other. But that being said, again, you do want to check that switch. Once you disconnect that, you want to make sure that switch is functional before you go ahead and replace the coil. Again, it can be tested. You should be able to find specs for it. I will try to do that and leave that in the description for you. While we have this, it's probably not a bad idea to flip it over, clean the deck, and sharpen the blades on this mower at the same time. So I was able to turn the mower on its side, scrape the dead grass, some of it's still green, off of the deck. Anyhow, my blade's actually in pretty good shape, but I still did take a grinding disc on a grinder like this and just straighten the edges out. Now a better way of doing it is removing the blade. It has a 16mm bolt right in the center. Once you remove that, the blade comes off. You can sharpen it easier and follow all the angles that are on the blade already. So with sharpened blades, deck cleaned, this mower is ready to go. I'm hoping this video has helped somebody out. If you have any questions, comments, please let me know. I thank you for watching.